Hello and welcome. My name is Stephen LeDrew. Many people I talk to, not so much in cities, but in small towns and rural communities across Canada, are concerned about the future of our society. They say, there's so much more crime, so many more people doing things wrong. So this isn't just about crime and punishment. This isn't just about the law, but a lot of people say, what's going on in our society? Why are things changing? And they're changing for the worse. Well, my guest today is Dr. Michael Bonner. He's written this book. It's called The Origin and Destiny of Freedom. The title is The Crisis of Liberalism. Now, it's not about the Liberal Party, the one that used to be, or one that says it is a Liberal Party now. This isn't about liberalism in the Canadian sense at all. It's about the basis of our society. And just before I bring in Michael, I gave him a head warning on this thing. I say, quote, I believe that the future of freedom in the West depends upon reversing or at least alleviating social decomposition. Well, that caught my eye. Okay, if you have the answers as to why we are going to pot, sometimes literally, the audience wants to hear them. So, Michael, I'm glad you're here. Welcome to the show. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
It's it has something there for everybody, for classes. Go back to the basis of liberalism, which is freedom from bad things and institutions which were overwhelming. Is that fair?
That's fair. The question you asked is basically, as long as we view freedom and the doctrine of freedom that we call liberalism as a kind of protest against institutions or sort of against community and social bonds, we're not really going to be able to alleviate the kind of social decomposition that you allude to. And so looking to a political doctrine of freedom for the answer to those problems is not going to lead anywhere. Now, we've been told, I would say, since, I don't know, maybe the 60s, that the way to a well-functioning society or the good life, or however you want to put it, is through maximum personal and individual autonomy and freedom. Now, I'm not opposed to those things, but it's clear to me, at least, that you can push them so far as to dissolve a society.
Which may be what's happening. I was very impressed when you quote Janis Joplin. And here, freedom is nothing less to lose. But in the Middle Ages, for instance, we had big, overwhelming institutions. People had very little freedom. Mostly were serfs. And liberalism was to cast off all those burdens. And so people were ending up now very free, very liberal. Some would say that too liberal. Freedom is something more than just freedom to make yourself look like an ass on stage or to destroy things.
Yes.
Particularly in the States, in an urban society, why I have freedom. I can throw a brick through that window and steal stuff. Well, that's not freedom. But so I come back to it. What is, in Canada, how are we going to deal with the fact that many of our institutions, which we loved, which some people would say built community, have been destroyed? You can't, put it back in the bottle.
No, well, I mean, I do think that there's a natural human tendency to try to form associations, communities. The family is certainly the basis of all that. But think of the consequences of having a political doctrine that told you that was bad, or that you might have a better life, dissolving those things or throwing off these burdens. You alluded to feudal society or to royal absolutism. You can make a case that those were indeed oppressive in some way. Is there anything that is actually comparably oppressive or heavy or weighty or burdensome now? I wouldn't say so. What is this struggle of freedom against in a society as free as Canada is? You're going to end up struggling against the system itself.
Okay, well, we're going to have to take a quick break because I want to leave on that fighting against the system itself, and we're going to come back talking about the church in Quebec in the 60s when it went from a very religious society to nothing. Right back after this. How are we going to get our civilized society back? That's the question I'm putting to Michael Bonner because he's written this book. And just before the break, we were talking about, casting off. Everybody said, no, we want to be free. But people don't behave well, civilized, when they're completely free.
No.
And if you don't have church, we're talking about Quebec, a church in Quebec went from being oppressive in the Quiet Revolution, as you pointed out, to being non-existent. It's just something people go to for Christmas and Easter. So that's not really a restraint. So do we need to have some sort of restraint? And where I'm going with this, I'm somewhat concerned about it. If we need to have restraint to make a more civilized society, is it going to be the government that does that? I mean, are we bound to be bound by a whole bunch of civil servants?
Well, I hope not. I mean, there are people.
I hope not too.
There are people who argue that liberalism has a tendency to sort of devolve into, or deteriorate, or however you like, into a kind of statist, quasi-tyranny, simply because the sort of intermediary institutions between government and people are sort of steadily eroded. And the example that you give from the Quiet Revolution from Quebec is a good example of that. That the local, the church, and then the local parish, for example, would have been the organizing principles of life for most people in Quebec for hundreds of years.
And it was the society is where all the events took place. It's where if you were in trouble or a family was in trouble, the church and the community would get together and help them out.
Correct.
It was a tight-knit community, and that, in my view, prevented many people from misbehaving.
Yes, and an underestimated element of that also is that churches are the kinds of institutions where people from one social class or one particular kind of background would interact with others of different backgrounds.
Right.
And that you would be sort of, united at least for a few hours a week in some kind of common purpose.
It was very democratic in that sense.
Right. And I think that losing those intermediary institutions, and I don't know if there are others that were of comparable sort of, that they had a sort of comparable capacity for mixing people as churches did, but losing that, I think, is actually very bad for democracy.
Yes, and it's also very bad for a civilized society. So I come back, and I'm going to come back a few more times to it. Is it inevitable that society is going to fall apart? We're in the decline of the American empire. We're in the decline of Canadian society, not that is much on the world scene. Or is there something that government or people can do?
Well, I think that decline has happened many times in the past. It certainly has happened. I mean, I don't know what you would call, say, the two world wars, apart from decline, or the period between them. Decline is a real thing. It happens. And it's not just an economic one. We're talking, that there are recessions and then we bounce back. But we're talking about the falling apart of an entire society. That can happen. I mean, it's an open...
Well, it's happening now. It's happening in the States when we see it. It's happening in urban centers in Toronto.
Many people would agree with that, yeah.
I would go back to what you said about the war, saying the war created something. It destroyed so many things, but created, especially in North America, a wonderful coming together afterwards. They had saved the English-speaking world. They had there's the boomers, and they had this great economy. So people came together. There's a huge society.
Yeah, wars can do that too.
But now, though, it just seems, as I say, and where I live in Buckhorn, people say, well, darn place is just falling apart. When you see the news in Toronto, and you see, the tremendous strife in the streets that's allowed. You see people throwing bricks through windows, and going in and grabbing stuff with impunity and just walking out. I mean, that's not a civilized society.
It isn't.
People, 12-year-olds stealing cars and hitting cops is not a civilized society.
Not at all. Not at all. Well, the question is what we're going to do about it. But I think that we're hampered by a doctrine that tells us that there are such things as victimless crimes, or that the criminal is simply a victim of some kind of social malaise. Whereas if we took a different view of what society means, we might find that we have different and better solutions.
On that note, we're going to take a break, and I'm going to hold you to it. I want the better solutions. Right back after this. Welcome back. I'm talking with Michael Bonner, who's written a fabulous book, and we are talking about, as you know, how we're going to possibly straighten out society, because it's not going to be the army coming in, I hope. It's not going to be necessarily more snoops in the streets, although neighborhood watch is something. But how are we going to get people to learn how to behave better? It used to be religion. It used to be schools. It used to be the family unit. I mean, in my family unit in Petrolia, if I didn't say thank you to the operator, she would call my dad and say, your son didn't say thank you. Well, that sort of puts a little snap in your day when you're told you didn't say thank you. But now that's rarely happening. And so what is going to replace it? Or is it just going to be disintegration?
Well, so far nothing has replaced it. In fact, there are fewer families now than there were before.
Of course.
That's sort of troubling in and of itself. But this is predicated. What you just described is predicated on the idea that a society is more than just a kind of aggregate of individuals, and that individual moral autonomy is a fundamental principle of practically all Western thought, of liberalism, and democracy depends on it enormously. But that doesn't mean that we should all be allowed to just do whatever we want and to treat others as though they're simply a means to an end, that there has to be a greater emphasis on corporate, communal, family, and whatever you might call it, sort of like social groups that go beyond simply the individual.
Precisely, Michael, but those are going by the wayside, which is why we have such a rash of incidents of bad behavior, whether it's violent or whether it's just laying back lazy, where it's just lying on the ground, shooting up drugs. So again, I don't want to hammer this too much, but I know people watching, and I want to know, do we just going to have to throw up our hands, everybody move they can to the country, and leave those Huns and Visigoths in the city, or what?
Well, I mean, the kind of thing that I'm describing and that you allude to is certainly more common in the country than it is in the city. The city is constantly churning through new populations that come in with different customs and so forth, and the country is much more settled and has been for a long time.
The countryside, not Canada. Okay, yeah. So then, are you suggesting? I don't want to put words in your mouth. That again has been happening more and more. We have there's a new book out talking about immigration in Canada, of how in 2015 it's just flipped over, and for the last 10 years immigration has been terrible in Canada. And it was Tony Keller of the Globe that wrote that book and won the prize, the Donner Prize. So he is saying that we've really screwed it up in the last 10 years.
Yeah, that's true.
Should we go back and be more selective and say, if you're coming to Canada, as 3 generations ago, you're coming here to be Canadian.
True.
You're not coming here to fight your tribal wars.
Yeah. Well, I would be in favor of that. But we also have to change our minds as to what we mean by society. Now, I think that there is a natural human tendency to try to form these bonds, whether it's kids with little clubs or the proverbial bowling league, or neighbors coming together.
Because it's more fun with other people.
Right. So let's change our minds about what it means to have a full and good life, that it isn't simply being a wholly autonomous individual. There's more to it than that, and that corporate community life makes better individuals, and that the government not that this is necessarily a matter of policy, the government would do well to just simply get out of the way, or better yet, find some way of rewarding that kind of institutional formation. Now, what that may look like, that's a matter for people to discuss and debate. But the first step would be to understanding that life is better that way. And, we don't have to live as entirely atomized, sort of disaggregated people in a non-society.
I think that most people would agree with you wholeheartedly on that. In other words, for people sometimes when they're get older and they're living by themselves, well, that stinks.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people would agree with that. But how many times have people been told, as I was growing up, that I can do whatever I want, I don't have to associate with anyone at all, and the good life might be just simply being alone?
Oh, well, whoever told you that caused you to write this book.
Indeed.
We're right back after this with the final answers. Michael Bonner is my guest. This is the book, The Crisis of Liberalism, as I had to start. Not the Liberal Party, that's in a crisis of its own, but how our society is not behaving at its optimum. And as I said, you've focused in on why it's going wrong. And I've been pursuing you since then as to how to make it better. Now, there's no question that most smart people, or even common sense people, understand family is important, community is important. And then the last section we were talking about immigration. Many people who don't understand our community and maybe should not have been allowed here in the first place unless they want to understand our community. But Canada used to be the source to come to Canada, and people want to be Canadian. You don't want to lose your Greek recipes. You don't want to lose your Italian flavor, but you want to become Canadian because it's a great place. We've lost that. We have people saying decolonization all the time. We have people ripping down our institutions. You can't put up a statue of Sir John A. Macdonald without somebody there saying, no, can't do that. We don't defend ourselves. Is that part of how we're falling down?
Yes.
We don't defend?
Well, ripping down institutions is certainly part of the liberal tradition. I think that
stinks.
I think it's not necessarily a good part, although, to be fair to them, there were elements of 19th century royal absolutism or a particularly oppressive clerical hierarchy that maybe needed to be cut down to size, but not necessarily abolished. We no longer have, the liberal West no longer has a huge looming geopolitical foe in the form of Soviet communism. We no longer have a colossal world struggle to fight against Nazi Germany or anything like that. The only thing left to struggle against is what we have here. And hence the chatter and sort of constant talk about decolonization or, purging institutions of whatever.
If we had a real threat, maybe some of these people were talking about that they can destroy Canada from within. They want to make it different in their own mind. If we had an outside threat, such as the Communist Party of China or Russia, coming down over the Arctic into North America, would that sort of straighten us up and say, hey, let's forget about this baloney that's been going on. Let's focus on the real things we need to do?
Well, I think it would have to. However, what I argue in the book is that the Cold War struggle was, in a sense, good for liberalism because it created a less ambitious, less, for lack of a better term, crazy version of it that was more measured. It was more comfortable with things like church going or family formation or unions and sort of the proverbial bowling society and so forth. And hence the idealized portrait of life in the 1950s in Canada or in America or the early 60s. There is a possibility of a liberalism that is more at ease with these sorts of things. I just would prefer, we find a way of doing it without, the threat of nuclear annihilation or, another sort of horrible showdown in Europe. Maybe we can find a way if we just, change our minds as to what the nature of freedom is and what freedom is for.
So we need better teachers then. If you just said, if we change our minds as to...
We need better teachers for sure. No question. We need better politicians. We need better everything.
Well, we do need better politicians, and I don't have the time to get into what politicians we have now. But I mean, after 10 years of the cockwomble, as I call him, I mean, people say, well, that's why Carney is so liked now, because they say he's on time, he dresses well, he speaks well, and he has gives good speeches, even though I would argue he's not doing anything. But that's
very little has changed. Very little has changed, and it's not too late. But let's hope that something happens.
Okay, I hear you on that. Let's hope that something happens. But then I think what we need then is also perhaps more public discussions like we've just had, and what you're talking about in your book, as to how do we go about, how do average people go about making a better place?
We've started it.
And you're a terrific guest, fabulous book, and that's the essential question: is how are we going to stop the deterioration? And you get some good answers to that. So, Dr. Bonner, thank you very much. So, Dr. Michael Bonner has been the guest. Here's the book, and the question I put to him in his book is: how do we reverse social decomposition? How do we make our society better? That's what this show is all about.